Well, some believe that a convention of states, a provision of the U.S. Constitution, may be the only way to get an out-of-control federal government back under control, regardless of who holds power. Whether it's an R or a D or a BFD beside their title, some people are looking at the federal government and just saying, you know what? Too many swamp members, too many lifelong politicians, spinning us into oblivion, always justifying it, always pointing the finger at the other party, and yet all too often the results are eerily too similar. And an update on the Convention of States in this final segment to the program. The president of the Convention of States movement in this country is Mark Meckler. Mr. Meckler, welcome to the program, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure, and thank you for your time and for being available to us, by the way. I might mention, before becoming president of the Convention of States Foundation and Convention of States Action, Mr. Meckler was co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots. He's very familiar with grassroots conservative movements and organizations. I always hate to, and we've talked to many people over the years about the Convention of States, and some of the people that I trust the most, some of the most legit conservative thinkers, writers, authors, talk show hosts, in my opinion, that are around today are supporting the Convention of States idea. It seems like something we're going to have to do, in my opinion. But even there are a lot of conservatives that I talked to, Mr. Meckler, about the Convention of States, and they're they're news geeks. They follow the stuff, but it's amazing how many people go, oh, really? What exactly is that? So I want us to begin there, if you would, so that we don't skip over some folks who have no clue what the Convention of States really is. Give us Convention of States 101. What is it, and why should the people care?
Sure. Article 5 of the Constitution contains two ways that we can amend the Constitution. First way is the way we've always done it for our 27 amendments, when two-thirds of both houses of Congress propose an amendment. It goes out to the states for ratification, and it takes three-quarters of the states to ratify. The second way, the way we've never used, the way that the founders said we would have to use if the federal government got out of control, is when two-thirds of the states call for a convention. The states gather in convention to discuss predetermined subjects. They discuss those subjects. And if half of the states or more, if 51% of the states agree, 26 states, that we need to propose amendments, then those amendments go out to the states for ratification by three-quarters of the states by the same process. So Article 5 allows us as states to react to federal tyranny by pushing back against that tyranny and restraining federal power. And that's what the Convention of States project is all about.
Do I understand correctly? Is it correct to say that while there very well may be others, if the two-thirds of the states needed would call for that convention, and that convention would come together, while there are maybe other issues that they address, two of the primary keys that you're talking about within the movement are term limits and a balanced budget amendment? Is that the key? Is that true? And if so, why do you think those are so important?
Yeah, that is true. And the way it's couched in terms of this particular resolution is that anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government is available for discussion. That would include a balanced budget amendment, but it would also include, for example, tax and spending caps. And then term limits is part of it as well, but not just term limits for Congress, which is what most people think of, but term limits for federal officials, which would include also bureaucrats, staffers, and potentially the judiciary. And I think those things are so important because we know that the federal government is spending out of control in regard to a balanced budget amendment. Right now, we just saw $1.9 trillion in spending. To be clear, spending money that we do not have, money we will either print or borrow. And that essentially is a taxation on future generations. We know that they're not going to restrain the spending. They're now talking about a $4 trillion infrastructure program. AOC says it has to be $10 trillion. So we know they're not going to stop until the economy collapses unless we stop them. And then the second is term limits. 85% of Americans are in support of term limits for members of Congress. But if you only limit members of Congress, you empower bureaucrats, staffers, and lobbyists. So that's why we expanded this to include all federal officials. I think those things are fundamentally important as we restructure the government. But also the third prong, the third approach that we take in convention is we can talk about anything that would limit the scope and power and jurisdiction of the federal government. People are frustrated with the federal government's involvement in energy, in the environment, especially in education. The federal government shouldn't have the authority to be involved in those things. They don't have that authority according to the Constitution. It's been granted by the courts, and we have to take that authority away from them.
What are the numbers? You need 34 states to come on board and want the convention, request the convention, and how many do you have? What's that status?
So currently we're at 15 states. I expect that we're going to get West Virginia in the bank this week, actually. It's already passed the Senate in West Virginia overwhelmingly. We're passing out of a committee, I think, today, and we should pass West Virginia completely by the end of the week. So that will be state number 16. North Carolina, South Carolina, Ohio, and some other states close behind, possibly Michigan. We should get over 20 states this year. We'll be far more than halfway there.
Talk more about the spending as we see our federal government spending us into oblivion, and I consider myself a conservative first, a Republican second, and obviously when we look at the two different parties, what we're seeing out of the modern-day Democrat Party is just mind-bogglingly insane. There's obviously a big difference, but hey, the truth is the truth. We can't let the Republicans off that easy. My gosh, to this point, they as well as a collective body have spent us into oblivion. 25, 28, now coming in on $30 trillion and spending money that we don't have. When it comes to the money, why should the people care, Mr. Meckler? Because millions are getting checks in the mail right now thinking, heck yeah, this is all good.
Yeah, look, the reason people should care is a little remembered concept called duty. And duty is doing the right thing, even if it doesn't benefit you directly today. And we have a duty to our children, to our grandchildren, and future generations. This is the duty that caused the founders and the framers to act, to fight the American Revolution, to actually put together the Constitution. The idea that posterity matters, that we should care about the next generation, frankly, more than we care about ourselves. We want them to be better off than we are. Not just as good as we are, but better off. And right now, that spending is absolutely creating indentured servitude among our kids, our grandkids, and our posterity. What's going to happen is in some way, somehow, they're going to pay for this. Either they're going to pay for it through radically increased taxes or by inflated currency, which is just another way of taxing the people. And that means their lifestyle, their ability to live a good, high-quality life will decrease. And that's what we're doing to our kids and our grandkids. And I would ask people to look in the mirror when you get that $2,000 check and say, is it worth it? I got this $2,000. Is this good for my kids and grandkids? If I know that I'm directly punishing them, do I really want this money? And I think most Americans would say no.
Mm-hmm. And I get it. I understand. Hey, if I qualified for one of those checks, what are you going to do? It's just going to show up in your account, or you're going to get a check in the mail. You're going to deposit it just like everybody else. But Mark Levin, in one of his books, I forget which one, boy, he pulls no punches. He comes at this spending directly, and he asks us, the American people, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, can we say that we truly love our children and our grandchildren if we're going to continue to look the other way? As long as that check comes to my mailbox, well, it'll be okay. We'll let the generations to follow deal with the debt as long as I get mine now. Can we really say that we love them and care about them if that's our attitude? And I think I'm hearing that's what you're talking about here.
Yeah, and the answer is unequivocally no. I mean, I'll tell you one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of, which I really appreciate, folks get these checks, stimulus checks, whatever you want to call them, and they're donating them to organizations like ours and saying, look, I got this money from the government. I don't feel good spending it, just using it for myself. I'm going to give it to people that are fighting back against this kind of spending. Let's use the government money against the government. Let's limit their spending. Let's call a convention. So we had a bunch of folks who actually wrote to us and said, hey, look, here's the money I got from the stimulus. please use it to stop there from being more stimulus.
How would a balanced budget amendment, if we could get that from a convention of states, help address and remedy this spending problem?
Yeah, here's why I think it's important. The majority of states have balanced budget amendments. They're not perfect. It doesn't mean a state doesn't find ways around them. But what it does is it forces politicians to make the tough decisions. One of the reasons that no one in D.C. makes the tough decisions is because they don't have to. There's nothing that demands that they balance the budget. And so from a human nature perspective, why would they? That's a painful decision for a politician. Every dollar cut has a constituency. Every program eliminated has a constituency. So if you put them in a position where they can and must say, hey, look, I don't really have a choice. This is constitutional. We have to do these things. Then the politicians actually will make the tough decisions, and that's what we have to force them to do.
In closing, Mr. Meckler, what are your thoughts on the idea of a convention of states versus another option, another I'm sick of the federal government option that is being talked about in some states? It's certainly being talked about in Texas right now, and that is the secession movement. Do we press forward with a convention of states and propose these constitutional amendments to rein in our out-of-control federal government? Or do we just look around us and go, my God, there's no stopping this. We're a snowball headed for a really hot place. And I say, and I know there are people that think this way, and my term, not anyone else's, screw California. They can fall off as far as I'm concerned. I don't want anything to do with them. I don't want to support them, and I don't want their people voting for people that are shoving this stuff down our throat. And so as Texas, it's time to back out and once again become our own independent nation. What are your thoughts on the pros and cons of the options?
Yeah, look, as a Texan, I understand the emotional appeal there, and I get that, but you have to understand history. First of all, countries don't come apart peacefully, and so what we're talking about really there is a civil war, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people dead, displaced, hunger, famine, violence in the streets. It's not something that happens quietly and peaceably, number one. Number two is, there's a reason that the founders came together. By the way, they didn't like each other very much. The colonies didn't like each other very much. Under the Articles of Confederation, they didn't like each other very much. But they understood something that's true today, which is they lived in a dangerous world, and they needed to come together to be a force for good and to defend themselves against a dangerous world. Today, we face the largest, the most dangerous geopolitical foe this country's ever faced in China. We face the Islamo-fascists. We face the drug cartels on our southern border. And it is just simply impossible for Texas to defend herself or to be a force for good in the world against those things. We actually need each other in that regard. And that's why a convention of states is so important. It is the only way to be a truly federalist system of government, meaning we come together to do a limited amount of things, defend ourselves in the world, be a force for good on the world stage, and then we go back to our states and govern ourselves as we see fit. The Convention of States is the ultimate act of federalism, and it is time to go back to the beginning and restore federalism in America.
You have 15 states now, a few more showing promise. You need 34. What's the holdup with red states? I mean, I think I understand why some blue states wouldn't want to, even though I understand there are blue states that even support the idea. Let's get the federal government out of it, and we'll make our decisions at the state level, wherever we are on the political scale. But what's the holdup with so many red states across the country?
Look, the holdup is that they've been duped. Some people on the right have been duped by the radical left. You'll hear the phrase runaway convention. And this is a phrase invented by Chief Justice Warren Burger, the Chief Justice who gave us Roe versus Wade. And he was trying to stop the calling of a convention to overturn Roe versus Wade. So he told some of his conservative friends, hey, if we do this, we might lose our beloved Constitution in a runaway convention. He was just trying to stop conservatives from using the Constitution to save the Constitution. That idea, unfortunately, has spread through conservatives. David Horowitz wrote an article about this. It's on our website. If you go to conventionofstates.com and search Horowitz, you'll find this. This is a leftist propaganda campaign to keep some people on the right from using a convention of states. And unfortunately, they've bought into the propaganda.
Do you feel like you're making some headway in getting the truth to those people that need to hear it?
Absolutely, we are. And I'll tell you, most people, if they read that article, they're convinced. I joke with my wife. I tell her, look, if you put me in a room full of people to talk about Convention of States, I'll convince all the rational ones that it's time to do it.
People can find out more on the website. Is that what you recommend?
Yeah, go to conventionofstates.com. And I got to tell you, like here in Texas, we've already passed the Convention of States, but our activists are heavily involved right now in the legislature, for example, in election reform legislation. So our folks stay involved. We are the largest self-governing grassroots army in American history, over 5 million people strong now. Get involved at conventionofstates.com.
And Texas has passed it. How about Oklahoma?
Oklahoma has passed it as well, and this year they're actually repassing it in honor of my good friend who passed away last year, Senator Tom Coburn. They had a sunset clause on it, and so they are now removing that sunset clause, so that will stay on the books there in Oklahoma. But that's going on right now.
I had the pleasure a few years ago of interviewing Senator Coburn about the Convention of States. And, boy, that was another of my many honors and the people that I've had the chance to talk to over the years. Great patriots, loves this country, and was very concerned about its direction right to the end of his life, wasn't he, Mr. Meckler?
He was, and I'll be honest with you, it's an honor to fight on in his memory. The hardest thing for me, honestly, is to keep going without Tom. I loved the man dearly. He was a personal mentor. I think he was a great American statesman. I think he could sit down with the founders and be right at home. So it's a great loss, but we're going to fight on in his name.
And for those that want to pull out their little handy-dandy pocket Constitution that I am holding in my hand right now and do a little bit of basic research on the Convention of States, they'll find it under Article 5, correct?
That's correct. There's 2 paragraphs in Article 5. The first part are 2 clauses. The first part is about the way that Congress proposes amendments. The second clause we're talking about, that's what you should be looking at.
And let me ask you this, too, before I let you go. One more question, in addition to one more question. The founders made provision for the Convention of States, but as you noted, it's never been used. We've never tried it in this country. What do you think the founding fathers would be thinking and saying today if they could see where we are and that we've never utilized it?
You know, this is something I've imagined a lot. I have a pretty vivid imagination. I like to think about and read about the founders. And my favorite founder to read about really is Ben Franklin. And one of the reasons is he was just so cantankerous. He was very smart, very curious, lived as long, if not longer, than any of the other founders. And I imagine myself sitting in one of the old ale houses there in Philadelphia having a talk with Dr. Franklin and explaining the situation we're in, how bad it is, how out of control the federal government is, how much we're spending, all the debt. And I imagine him looking at me and asking, well, what have you done about it? Well, we've tried to elect good people. We've complained about it. We've protested about it. And I imagine him staring at me kind of blankly and saying, well, what about Article 5? Have you called a convention? And me saying no, and I think he would be furious. I think he would want to know, how dare you? We gave you the methodology. We told you this problem is coming. Why haven't you used it? And I think I'd be embarrassed to tell him that, well, there's a whole bunch of people that are kind of afraid of it. And he would say, fear? God hates cowards. Right? America was not founded by cowards. We fought the American Revolution. We founded this constitutional republic based not on fear, but on faith and on bravery. And I think he would be absolutely horrified that we hadn't used it yet.
Amen. Amen. Mr. Mark Meckler, president of the Convention of States. You can learn more, conventionofstates.com, as the movement continues to grow across the country. Mr. Meckler, please consider it an open invite, sir. I just see it as something so critical to the future of our nation, for our kids and our grandkids. And we'll be taking time for it here. So anything else you want our folks to know, please reach out.
Will do. God bless. Thanks for having me.
God bless. Thank you, sir. Mark Meckler, the president of the Convention of States. You know what he says there? To me is so right. And I come back to that position when I hear from some of you from time to time. And I get it. I certainly get it. And you say you're frustrated. Look what they've done. Look at the liberals. Look at this mess. They stole this election. And there's nothing that we can do that makes any difference, so I don't know if I'm even going to vote anymore. Imagine telling that to one of these founding fathers. Imagine telling that to those that lost their lives during the Revolutionary War, during the Civil War, and on and on and on again. No, we don't drink the Kool-Aid. No, we don't bail. Well, there's nothing we can do, so I guess I'll just... No, hell no.
I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks are willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.